Okay, we gotta push the OK button and off we go.
Everybody mute, please, except Don
Except for Warner and me
and Don.
and Don. Right. All right. Well, as Alan said, we had 63 sign up, and right now we're at 39, which is a good start. Some people usually come in at a little bit later time, but this is going to be a nice event tonight, and Warner really is his topic tonight is not on the Art 201 syllabus, chasing down a stolen painting by Impressionist master Camille Pissarro. But before we start, we've got a little bit of a promo for you and I think you may have seen something that we're getting ready to set up like we did with Ted and Sally McPherson before our reunion, which is coming in June of 2027. We had such a great event that the McPhersons put on for us in Gettysburg that we thought some events around the country in different places would be a great way to start. Sorry. Turn that off. There we go. Would be a great opportunity for us. And what we have found was that Don Brown has offered for us to go and have a visit to Montgomery, Alabama. And Don has put together really a fantastic program for him. And I'd like to give him a couple of minutes just to say what he's offering. It's going to be on June 4th to the 7th in 2026. And it's really a 3-day operation and an awful lot of really very interesting things. So, Don, do you want to just speak to that for a minute?
I will for just a short piece. Yeah. We're just trying to continue the tradition of having a real social gathering, but with an entertainment and education component to it. And I was given an offer I couldn't, that I was not allowed to refuse. Others of you who have put on these gigs before recognize what we're saying, but we're going to do this in the first week of June. I can promise you one thing: in Montgomery, Alabama, it will be hot and it will be humid. For those of you who haven't acclimated, you can go to a sauna somewhere and practice. What we're going to do is to combine a bit of an educational, academic explanation and briefings along with some absolutely world-class and important and engaging, primarily African-American sites. We'll focus on what was happening in particular when we were in school. I mean, we were focused in 63 to 67 on Smith, Vassar, Holyoke, Wellesley, Bennington, Skidmore, etc., and weren't focused on events that were really significant. The civil rights movement began here, and there are some extraordinary sights to see. What we'll do, we'll get here on Thursday, warm up easy that evening. Friday, we've got some major world-class pieces that will explain enslavement in a way that will be absolutely sobering and memorable. And a couple of major things we'll play that night at my house, a big thing. It'll hold all of us. We'll have a great dinner, a lot of social connections, and we'll have a surprise event that you don't have to go to Stockholm or London or Paris to see. It'll be a fun thing. We'll talk about that one maybe when the team decides to let that word out. We'll go rest. I keep being told that 80-year-olds do need a little rest overnight and during the day. Can't imagine why. Saturday, we'll have a series of options after a morning lecture on the history of this place one more time. I've got a couple of people that are absolutely front-rank authors that will give us that background. We'll have a full day on Saturday, but you'll be able to pick and choose from some sites. We'll give you all this stuff ahead of time so that you can plan it carefully. And then that night we'll have a celebratory final dinner at an amazing restaurant that's really across the street from the hotel. Our hotel is that we're using is one called Trilogy. It's a Marriott Bonvoy site. The rates are decent. It's a great place to be. It's literally within a 5-10 minute walk of many things that we're going to see. It's easy. You'll enjoy it. We'll finish that evening, say our goodbyes Sunday, and go on. What we'll need to do is to get some feedback from you as to whether or not you will come or you might come, so that we can handle probable room count and so forth. We're looking forward to it. You'll be entertained by ourselves and by the venues that we'll have a chance to see. Looking forward to seeing you.
Well, Don, thank you. And you are really wonderful to be hosting this for us and putting it together. And you've really worked it with Ron and with Alan and with Harry to really put together a nice piece for us. I think it's really going to be a very interesting time. As a matter of fact, Heather Cox Richardson just did a piece on the 15th of September in 1963, as we were just entering college, was when the 16th Street Baptist Church was blown up, and it really, that was the start of a lot for the civil rights movement. And I think a lot of people had been involved in that and through college.
John, you want to give the dates one more time? We'll send something out in a week.
It's June 4th to June 7th. It's Thursday, June 4th to Sunday, June 7th.
Thank you.
And as I say, there's going to be a lot of information that'll come out about it, but Don has done a tremendous amount of work getting it set up, and I think it will be an enjoyable and a very educational piece for us all. Okay, on to Warner Fletcher, who's sitting right there next to Mr. Alden, I believe, who's behind you. And Warner, when he graduated from Williams, he went to the Navy. And from the Navy, he really went from there on to Boston University School of Law, finished that, and started practicing with his father in Fletcher and Tilden, PC. Warner and I have had lots of time together as attorneys because he's done estate and administration and also a lot of charitable work. And both of us were SOBs, sons of the boss. We had a lot of laughs early on as we did that, but we both had the privilege of working with our fathers for a period of time. And it really was a great experience for me, and I know it was for Warner, and we've talked about that a lot. Warner has really been a trustee of several trusts and also a trustee of the Worcester Museum. He has been really involved in Worcester in terms of making sure that city continues to maintain its status, and has really done a tremendous amount. So tonight, he's going to be speaking to us on Art 2001, What's Not on the Syllabus. So Warner, you want to start out, and thank you for doing this for us.
Thank you for all joining. Being a lawyer, I think the worst thing a client can usually hear from his or her or their client, their lawyer, is, this is a very interesting case. And this particular incident that I'm going to talk about was certainly that for me. It had very interesting and unusual issues. It involved had a good positive result, obviously, in recovering this painting, but even more so that it, instead of going to the family that it belonged to, it moved to the Worcester Art Museum, where it is now visible when it isn't on tour for almost everybody. This really, I think, was a once in a lifetime wonderful experience. And probably the biggest part of, large part of it, was that the Stoddard family that was involved. My middle name is Stoddard. Mr. Stoddard was my uncle, and Mrs. Stoddard was my aunt. So for a personal relationship, family thing, was also wonderful. What I thought I would do is kind of touch on some of the aspects of this journey through 9 key players. Because I think, like anything, when something goes well, there's always an element of luck. If it goes well, it's good luck. If it's bad, it's bad luck. But this story actually had 3 major elements of pure happenstance, good luck, that had they not all occurred, there wouldn't be any story here. The painting would still be off in someone else's hands somewhere. So I guess if we put up the first slide of the Stoddards. They're kind of shy, I think.
Next one down. There we are.
Okay, so this is my aunt and uncle. They were leading citizens in Worcester when I was growing up. Actually lived 2 houses up from my family home. He was a successful businessman, following in his father's footsteps, a major owner of a company called the Wyman Gordon Company, and also a major owner of the local Telegram newspaper in Worcester. She was a Francophile, loved art, studied in France, and they, over a period of time, started collecting art in the 50s and 60s. One particular painting in question was a harbor scene by Camille Pissarro, and we do have a picture of him. He was not a classmate. Okay, that's Mr. Pissarro. He was by many considered the father of the Impressionists, or a major father of the Impressionist movement. Died in 1903. There was one particular painting he painted in 1902, shortly before he died. It was one of many river scenes or harbor scenes that he did. This is the one in question. My aunt and uncle purchased it in 1951 on a trip to New York City, purchased it at the Knoedler Gallery, and paid $7,000 for it. They had some other paintings. They enjoyed the painting. They were big supporters of a lot of nonprofits in Worcester, especially the Art Museum. And everything was hunky-dory until the night of June 22nd, 1978, when my aunt was in Boston in the hospital. My uncle was at home, and he was a hunter, very active. And when he woke up in the morning, he went out of his bedroom, and there, leaning against the wall, was a fire poker from the fireplace in their living room. And he went downstairs, and everything was ransacked. Paintings were missing. If he'd ever woken up and heard anything, he would have gone charging out, and he could have had a very bad result. There were 9 paintings stolen, one by Camille Pissarro, a Renoir, a Boudin, a Henrik Averkamp, John Turner, and a bunch of other stuff. The standard work, the police were involved. We notified the FBI were notified, but nothing really came of it. We learned quickly that the FBI, and rightly so, got its hands more than full chasing down terrorists or public art thefts, such as the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, which is in Worcester, in Boston, which in 1990 had probably one of the largest thefts of paintings from a public museum. There has ever since been one particular member of the FBI heading up this investigation. Rembrandt's, Cezanne, Vermeer's, very, very valuable paintings. And it's ironic, with all of the resources they have, they haven't found one thing yet. And in our case, with limited resources and no particular expertise, we've been able to recover this, at least one painting. These paintings were insured through Liberty Mutual Insurance Company. And I'll talk more about that later. It was just, but in those days, my aunt and uncle, they didn't angst over it. This happened. They put it behind them. They went on with their lives. They actually went down, took some of the insurance proceeds, went down to New York, and used a gallery a guy named William Beatleston, and he sold them 3 replacement paintings, another Pissarro, water scene, harbor scene, a Camille Pissarro, and an Alfred Sisley, all landscapes. And it's funny that, it's not funny, but my uncle died in 1984 and my aunt died in 1998. She never saw the painting come back, but when my uncle died in 1984, the replacement paintings he bought in his name. So when he died, I went to talk with my aunt in settling his estate and let her know that these paintings now belong to the museum. I'm still lucky to be alive. She did not take to that very kindly. As far as she was concerned, they were her paintings. But being in a small town city, we worked things out with the museum. When she was at home, the paintings would be still in her living room. And whenever she went away, the museum would come out and batch them up and take them back to the museum. So we were lucky, and it lengthened my life quite a bit to have that happen. Just briefly, once we learned that, the other thing I will say that, which I'll talk about later, there's an outfit called the Art Loss Register, which is, you probably never heard of it, is based in London, used to have an office in New York, and they provide a service where any paintings or artwork that's stolen, you can report it to them, and they will put it in their database. And then if someone else happens to be looking at a painting in a gallery, especially if it's got lots of zeros after the first few numbers, they can and definitely should contact the Art Loss Registry to see if they have any record of it being stolen. Because so I'll do a little more on that. So this painting came to our attention when the director of the museum in 1998, which is 20 years after the theft, called me one day. We were up in Maine taking some friends out for a walk. This was on a Friday, and I picked up the phone, and he was off the wall, almost screaming about my aunt's Pissarro painting had been recovered. I didn't remember the name of the painting or anything about it, but it had turned up as the lead painting in an auction in Cleveland to be held the following next Saturday and Sunday. So when he finally calmed down, we then started talking about what we were going to do on Monday. The first important thing was to try and secure the painting and get it pulled from the auction. So then at least we knew the painting would be there, and then you could argue, as would be needed, with whoever had it to determine or show that you were the original owner. And then the second thing was I mentioned Mrs. Stoddard. Her husband died in 84. She was still alive and very much with it, but she was 94 years old. So we prevailed upon her to do a codicil to her will to provide that when she died, this painting would go to the Worcester Art Museum. That will was signed in October of '98, and at the end of November, she died. So she never saw the painting actually come back, but she knew that it was going to come back, and she was very happy to have it go to the museum in Worcester. So the two basic issues became, one, is this an original Pissarro, or is it a fabrication or a forgery? And assuming whatever it was, is it or was it the same painting that had actually been stolen in 1978? And then we also had some interesting dealings with Liberty Mutual, the insurance company. Basic primer on the law in the United States: if I have a painting stolen, and we'll say it's like all the other paintings in my house, about $1 million worth. If it's stolen and Dave Reichert gets a hold of it, and assuming he pays, $1,020,000, which is the fair market value of it, if it comes to a light that he has purchased a stolen painting, and I make the case, I am entitled to get that painting back, and David is out $1,020,000. The law in Europe is a little different. If you buy it and under those same circumstances, and it comes to light it's stolen, you can essentially continue to hold it and enjoy it during your lifetime, but you're not supposed to be able to transfer it. So that's what we started to do. Nothing really happened in 1978, and we went on with it. So in the process of, we had 5 days to try and get the painting pulled from the auction. We hired an attorney in Cleveland who'd never had anything like this, but was a classmate of mine at law school. I talked with the lead art person for the FBI. There didn't seem to be a lot of interest. I ended up talking with the FBI heading up the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum theft. We had a good conversation, but when he realized that I was calling about a painting that had been stolen privately, he basically said, good luck. So we never, we didn't know we had any response from the FBI, so we proceeded to set up with the attorneys in Cleveland to go into court on Thursday afternoon in the local civil court there with whatever evidence we had to show that we were the original owners of this painting, and just asking the FBI to pull the painting from the auction. And then once they did that happened, then we could establish, hopefully, that we were the owners of the painting and the painting would come back to us. Or if we didn't prevail, then the current quote unquote owners of the painting could get the painting back. So we were just about ready to go, and on Thursday morning the phone rings, and my secretary says it's a Mr. Wolf from Cleveland, and the name of the gallery was Wolf's Art Gallery in Cleveland. And she said, "Do you know him?" I said, "Yeah, I don't know him, but I know of him." And he picked up the phone and we talked, and he was, very concerned because this painting, they'd never auctioned off a painting. This was worth $1.5 million or so at that time, and they'd never auctioned off anything like that. And with the buyer's premium and the seller's premium, he was going to make a pretty good buck on this painting. But so what he was trying to do was, he asked if my client knew how valuable the painting was, and I said, well, yes and no. It probably doesn't really matter. And he said, would she agree to pulling the painting from the auction, determining who was the owner, and then having that person sell the painting if they wanted. And I said, are you asking me to ask her that? And he said, would you? And I said, of course. I said, however, she loves paintings and artwork, and I think her opinion is it's been an unauthorized loan for 20 years, and she really just wants it back. So obviously, we didn't agree with that, but with the while he was talking to me, there were two FBI agents on either side who had just come into the gallery to seize the painting and pull it from the auction. So the FBI did come through, and we got the painting pulled from the auction. So another question is, who was the stealer of the painting when it was stolen in 1978? There really wasn't any certitude as to who that was. There was a rather sketchy or dodgy art dealer, it turned out, named Robert Cornell, who had an art gallery in Holyoke, Mass, which is near Springfield, which is about 35 miles from Worcester. His name had been bandied about at the time of the theft. The FBI and the police had talked with them, and he said, no, I didn't do anything like that, and nothing ever came of it. Interestingly, when the painting came to light in 1998, there was a local Telegram and Gazette reporter named Frank Majira who got really interested in this, and he went out and spent extensive time interviewing Cornell, and he went on and on about the fact that he had nothing to do with it. He was, familiar with art, and if he'd had a Pissarro painting, he would have known what it was, and he would never have let it go. It turned out, however, that I think he was not being entirely truthful. Another character who also played a big role in this was his wife, or actually ex-wife at this point, named Jennifer Abella Cornell, and she was the bringer to the lighter of the table of the painting. He'd married her from Puerto Rico and allowed her to come and stay in the country, and she worked with him in his artistic ventures. One of them, at one point, he got into selling and trading coins. They were divorced in the early 90s, and it was she who found, quote unquote, the painting in a closet in the house where they had lived, and she now lived in the Holyoke area. There were this painting and two others. She had some financial issues and had a friend named Kenneth Bement, who lived out in the Cleveland area, who she'd met through some of these coin dealings. And she told him her situation. She said she really needed a loan of $5,000, and if he would loan her that money, she would give him 3 paintings as collateral, the Pissarro painting and the 2 others. And that he agreed to do that. And then somewhat later, she called again and said she was still having some financial issues, and would he consider, in effect, forgiving the $5,000 loan, loaning or giving her another $5,000, in which case she would give the 3 paintings to him for whatever value they might have. And he had another friend who knew something about art, and they agreed to this, and she agreed to bring the paintings out to Ohio to turn them over to them, which she did. And she moved out of the scene. They interestingly came up with they didn't go to a lawyer. They had a 1-page written contract about this painting, which appeared to be a Pissarro painting, about what they would do with it. If it was a forgery, what they would do with it. If it was a real painting, what they would do with it. And they both signed it. Bement's friend suggested that that they ought to talk to an art gallery to perhaps sell it, since they probably needed the money and didn't need a Pissarro to look at. So they the ones that contacted the Wolf Gallery to talk about auctioning the painting up for him. So the next character was not a real person, is the Art Loss Register in London, as I've mentioned. They indicate on their website that, quote unquote, we help lost items of art to be reunited with their owners through our extensive database of stolen and disputed art. What I wondered right at the outset is that this, I thought, would be something that the Mr. Wolf, as the owner of an art gallery, would have thought of right off the bat, because, you know, it isn't healthy or good for one's reputation to publicly end up having tried to sell some stolen art. And I was always questioning why because he seemed to be a bright person and someone who would know this kind of thing. And when we later went out to Cleveland to try and wrap things up, one of the first questions I asked him was, why didn't you call the Art Loss Register? He got back to me and he said, I did. And I said, what happened? And he said, after a while, they got back to me with a letter and said they have no evidence in their records that this painting was ever stolen. And they gave him a letter to that effect. What I think happened is that when we reported the theft of these paintings in 1978, we sent him a copy of the theft record, which listed the 9 paintings and identified them a little bit. And they kept a record of it. Between 1978 and 98, they had started digitizing their records. And I think what happened is that this particular report had not been digitized. So when he made the call, they checked the digitized records and told him that this painting was not stolen. So I think that was the first major piece of good luck with this case, because I believe that if they had called him back and said that painting is reported stolen, he would have gone back to the consigners and said, I can't sell this. And they would have taken the painting back, and Lord knows what would have happened, but it certainly wouldn't have come to our attention, at least at that point in time. I don't know that, but you know, I'm forever grateful that they screwed up on that letter of theirs, and I still have a copy of it. The almost auctioneer Michael Wolf was an interesting guy, I thought, and I felt very sorry for him because, you know, he thought he had a very prestigious painting to sell, and for which he would get a great commission, and he'd done his homework in less than 48 hours before the auction. It all fell apart for him. He was a wonderful guy, and I that was one of the sad things about this whole event, I thought. So what we had to do is try and establish, what I said, that this was an original Pissarro, and it was one which was the same one that the Stoddards owned. And we had some good luck there because when we had to put together whatever evidence we could have, the Stoddards had lived in that home. Mrs. Stoddard lived there until her death in 1998. So, and my uncle kept a lot of records, a lot of filing cabinets in the basement. if they'd moved or she'd moved anywhere, I think a lot of those would disappeared. But they were down there, and with some frenetic searching, we found a picture, a copy of the original bill of sale. And on the front of the bill of sale was a photo of the photograph of the painting. We also found a painting, which one of many he'd taken of the painting installed over the fireplace lintel, with a roaring fire in the fireplace, which I think curators would have frowned at. But and then we also had the with a gentleman named Joaquin Pissarro, which I'll get to, who was an expert. He had a copy of the original painting. We had the original. So we had all of that to hand over, ready to go, with the court in asking for an injunction. There were two depositions we were going to take. We wanted to take a deposition of my aunt because she knew what happened. And at 94, we wanted to preserve that testimony. And it was one of the most comical depositions. Not that I've been involved with a lot, but a deposition, if you haven't been involved, is an uncomfortable session you go through to explain whatever you're going to explain. But with the lawyers, you really have to answer yes or no, or very simply. And the attorney for the other side, we had set it up in the living room. She was sitting in a chair next to the fireplace it was a video deposition. And interestingly, both of the chairs, the mantelpiece, and every little nick and stuff on the mantelpiece was exactly the same as the photograph taken by my uncle shortly after they purchased it in 1951. The only one thing different, there was nothing hanging over the mantelpiece. So anyway, the lawyer was very diligent, and he asked a question and she started to answer, and he said, "Mrs. Stoddard, would you please answer yes or no?" She said yes, and he asked the next question, and I think he had a pretty good feeling that their case was doomed to fail. But the same thing happened. She answered yes and then started running on. After about 4 questions, I think he felt kind of guilty that he was picking on this 94-year-old lady, and her deposition was a long one, talking about a lot of stuff that had no relevance. But it was a good thing to have in place, and I'm glad we did. The second issue was that of establishing the validity of the painting, and it was the same one. And we found through the museum a gentleman named Joaquin Pissarro, who was the great-grandson of Camille Pissarro. And he was a professor at Yale University. And he was current co-publisher of what is called a catalog raisonné of Mr. Camille Pissarro's paintings. A lot of major painters like that have people who do catalog raisonné. They try and collect all of the paintings that they can find by that particular painter, and information on the provenance and where it was. And so we contacted him to agree to be deposed, and he was very reluctant. He'd never been deposed before and didn't really want to get in the middle. But we had 2 things that kind of helped us out. One is that I early on let him know that because of what Mrs. Stoddard had done, when we recovered this painting, it would not be going to her family. It would be going to the Worcester Art Museum. It would be on public display for anyone to look at. I think the other very interesting coincidence is that in his role as promoting his great-grandfather's paintings. Sometime between 1984 and 1998, he was trying to put together a exhibition of a series of paintings. And Pissarro did a number of series paintings like harbor scenes. Monet did one of the facades of cathedral and water lilies. And he was trying to do a show of privately owned paintings by Pissarro of harbor scenes. And he wrote a letter to my aunt and uncle at their address, explaining who he was and what he was doing, and wondering if they would be willing to allow their painting to be participate in the show, and it would increase the value, because once it's public shown, that helps the value. And she wrote back in longhand, "Oh, thank you for calling me. I thought you knew that our painting was stolen in 1978 and all that." And he wrote back and said, "Wow, I'm sorry to hear that. I know how much you enjoyed it. And, if anything ever shows up and I have any access to it, I would certainly let you know." So I think when he realized that the painting in question that we were asking him to talk about was stolen from Mrs. Stoddard in Worcester, Massachusetts, he remembered that and changed his tune. And if there were any nails lacking in the coffin of their case, he slammed them all shut with his testimony. And the was more brief and to the point, but the attorney was questioning him, how do you know this is an original painting, or how do you know this is the same painting? And he said, "Excuse me," he said, "I'm looking at a copy of the original bill of sale in the picture of the painting. I'm looking at the photograph of the painting over the fireplace. I'm looking at the photograph of the painting I have in the catalog raisonné. I'm looking at a copy of the painting, which is now at the Wolf Gallery." And he said, "A 15-year-old could tell you after 5 minutes that these are all the same painting." So he was a tremendous help, and we appreciated his testimony very, very much. So then the next character, and this is the third piece of really good luck, was another gallery owner in New York named William Beadleston. And I had mentioned that after the theft, some point after, my aunt and uncle had gone to New York and bought 3 more paintings, one of which was another harbor scene by Pissarro. So how did this painting come to light? Well, there was a character, and I know who it was, who was looking in the gallery in Cleveland, and saw the painting sitting there, and had resources and was very interested in purchasing it. And it so happened that he had a dealer in New York he knew that he trusted and looked to, happened to be William Beadleston. So he called him and said, "I'm looking at this painting up for auction in Cleveland, in a couple of weeks, and I'm really interested in it. And I'm wondering if you could do some provenance check for me." And he said, "Sure." And he gave him the information. Well, Mr. Beadleston turned out knew of Pissarro, and called him up and explained why he was calling for a client of his who was considering purchasing this painting up for auction. And he gave the name of the painting and the description. And Mr. Pissarro checked his records and got back, and he said, "Well, that's very interesting, because this painting was reported stolen in 1978 by a couple in Worcester, Massachusetts." And I had in fact talked with the widow on a separate matter a while ago. And Beadleston said, "Thank you very much. and he called up his customer and said, that isn't something you want to bid on. And I think if it ended there, he wouldn't have bid on it. The painting would have probably been auctioned off and we never would have received it. But even if he'd said you should buy it, how did it get to Mrs. Stoddard? Well, he was thinking about it later on, and he said, I suddenly seem to remember that sometime in the late late 78 or 80 or something, there had been a couple from New England who had come in and bought some paintings, and I seem to recall that they might have been trying to replace some stolen paintings. So he went back to his records, found the material which had their address, got an old phone book when phone books existed, and looked up, and there was Robert Stoddard, 19 Monmouth Road, Worcester, Mass, with the same phone number, as it turned out. So he called up, and one of the maids answered, and he explained who he was and asked if Mr. Stoddard was around, and the maid said, well, no, he died in 1984. He said, well, is Mrs. Stoddard still around? And she said, yes. And he said, could I talk to her? And the maid said, what's your name again? And she went off. And about 5 minutes later, my aunt showed up and said, hello. And he said, Mrs. Stoddard, this is William Beetleson. You don't remember me, I'm sure. She said, of course I remember you. You sold us several paintings back a while after we'd had some stolen. And he said, was any of them a painting by Camille Pissarro? And she said, yes. Do you remember it? And she rattled off the name and the date, 1902. And he said to her, Mrs. Stoddard, I believe I have uncovered your stolen painting. And of course, she went crazy over that. But without that was really the key in getting the information to us. So the other name I want to mention is a young lawyer named Jan Sauerman, who was a Liberty Mutual insurance lawyer out in Cleveland. And when we took the painting out there, where we had it also examined by a subsequent director of the museum who came up from Texas and who had seen this painting and knew about it. And when we took it out of the box and he looked at it, it was, people who love artwork have a chance to see something like this. They really enjoy it. But the issue we had with the insurance, which was an interesting one, which we'd never, is that I said that when the painting was stolen, the Liberty Mutual paid money on it. And they had insured it through a fine arts rider that you can put on your homeowner's policy, and you list a particular item of art with a price. And they had bought it for $7,000. The Pissarro was listed on the fine arts policy for a value of $95,000. So they had updated it, but hadn't updated it very recently. And I suppose I understand. I don't know what the rates are, but I think to insure something for $1.5 million or $1 million is a pretty expensive annual fee for something that will never happen to you. That is, the theft or destruction of the painting. But we notified them, and he was assigned to handle this claim. And the question is, what was a Liberty Mutual insurance company entitled to? Certainly the $95,000. Under law, they were also entitled to interest on it from the date of the theft to the date of recovery, which was 20 years, which was about $150,000 or so more. And we had at least a little bit of a concern that they might argue or try to argue that the painting was insured for $95,000, which we assumed was the fair market value. Therefore, since the painting had been recovered and they had paid quote unquote fair market value at the time, they should get the painting. So we went back and forth with him, and we made a point of letting him know that this painting was not going to Mrs. Stoddard or her daughters, but was going to the Worcester Art Museum, where it would be available for everybody. And he went back to Liberty Mutual and came back and said, Liberty Mutual will take $95,000 and you can have the painting, which was wonderful, because it saved some of the expense, obviously. And when she died later, so that 95,000 with some other insurance proceeds was what I think they used to purchase the subsequent paintings. So once that happened, the depositions of both Mr. Pissarro and my aunt, and the testimony by Dick Teitz, the prior executive director, their case really collapsed. They didn't have a lot of money, so they didn't really want to fight it. We were able to work out a very modest settlement that they got to cover their costs, and the 10,000 they had lent, and they went on the way, and eventually the painting was returned to Worcester and went to the art museum. There are a couple of things that I think are kind of interesting, which I guess I would entitle the rest of the story. One, the effect of this case on Jan Sauerman was amazing and heartwarming. We wouldn't, as liberal arts, going to a liberal arts college, I don't think we would have been in the same situation. But at the end of the proceedings out there, when we were sure we were going to get the painting back, I said to, and he took 1,000 pictures of the painting. I said to Jan, I said, you know, if you're ever in Worcester, Massachusetts, let me know, because this will be at the Worcester Art Museum, and I want to take you down and see it after it's all been cleaned. And we talked, and we left. 5 or 6 years later, early in June, my secretary came in and said, there's a Jan Sauerman on the phone. He says he knows you. And I looked up and looked around. And I says, I don't remember him, but took the call. And he said, Warner? And I said, yeah. He says, this is Jan Sauerman. I said, oh, Jan, how are you? And he said, you don't remember me, do you? And I said, well, he said, I'm the Liberty Mutual lawyer from Cleveland. I said, oh, yeah. And we talked, and I said, what brings the call to mind? He said, well, in a couple of months, I'm coming out to Martha's Vineyard for a couple of weeks of vacation, and I was thinking of taking a day off and renting a car and driving up to Worcester to the museum and hopefully see the painting. Is that something we could do? I said, absolutely. So we picked the date, lined up my co-attorney who was very involved, and I went down to the museum to see the director that day, and he was not around, and his secretary said, I don't think he has an appointment. He might have been up in the gallery with someone. And I said, I know who it is. We went up, and there they were sitting in front of the gallery, and Jan had all his photographs, and they were looking at it and talking about it. But the best thing was during lunch afterwards, we were talking, and he said, you know, I can't tell you how this has changed my life. He said, I lived in the Cleveland area all my life, and Cleveland has a fabulous art museum. He said, I lived in this area all my life, graduated from college, went through law school. And when this case came up, I had never been in an art museum. And he said, I can't tell you how this changed my life. He said, anytime I go to someplace I haven't been, if there's an art museum and I can get to see it, I do it. He said, I just love all about this stuff. that I never knew until I was, whatever, he was something like 35 or 36 years old. And I thought that was really almost one of the best things that happened, to have this experience change his life so much for the better. I guess the other question would be, there were 8 other paintings that were stolen, and 47 or so years have gone by since the paintings were stolen, and 27 since the recovery in 98. Has anything else happened? Well, after the painting came to light and we learned what had happened, I wrote a very, not mean-spirited, but sort of testy letter to the Art Loss Register and said, listen, this is what happened. We reported the theft in 1978. We've just recovered one of the paintings. You told the art dealer that the painting had not been stolen. I'm going to send you another copy of the list of paintings, and you get them on your database. Well, they said, oh, yes, they were very apologetic. In 2006, I got a call from the Art Loss Register, and it turned out that there was another painting that was stolen, by a small watercolor little painting like this by Child Hassam, who was an American Impressionist painting, painted in New England and Maine. And a painting that he had painted, and which was reported stolen, had showed up at a Christie's art auction. And what I learned is, whenever Christie's or Sotheby's or anyone is having auctions of artwork, they will send a list of all of the paintings or whatever they are to the Art Loss Register and ask them, they pay some sort of a fee to check to see if any of those paintings have been stolen. And in this case, it was a small painting. It turned out to not be a museum-worthy painting, because the Worcester Art Museum already had a number of Hassam paintings that were much better. But, this turned out an elderly couple in New Jersey had gone into a gallery, or it might have been the Brimfield Fair in west of here. Just a minute on that. But and had seen this painting and had fallen in love. And it was a very different little painting, because it was framed, but the subject of the painting went over the painting, the mat, and the frame. So it was very unique. And they had paid about $125,000 for it, and didn't know about checking for provenance, or didn't think about it. And whoever sold it to them didn't, suggest to them that they could do that. And they realized that very quickly that this was the same painting, especially because of the way it was formatted. But since it wasn't a museum-worthy painting, we worked out a very nice arrangement where both sides agreed to put the painting up for auction, and after all of the fees, we would take 2/3 and they'd take 1/3, and the painting sold for about $75,000. So they took a real hosing, and my clients, or Mrs. Stoddard's 2 daughters, got a little money. So that was the only thing that showed up. Although there was one other episode, the Art Loss Register did call about a drawing by Renoir of a gentleman's or woman's head. And we sent a copy of the one we had, to them, and they got back and said, ain't the same one. But I said that this experience was, a once in a lifetime experience that I will never forget, for all of the most wonderful reasons. What's better than a once in a lifetime experience like that is a second time experience like that. And Alan, do you have that painting?
Yep, hold on.
Wrong, yeah. This is a painting by a painter named Henrik Averkamp, which recently 4 years or so came to light, and through a very different process, which was very interesting, we thought, in its own way. We got involved in trying to bring that back, and it was over in Belgium, and we did recover it, and it was returned to the museum about a month ago, and it's now hanging in the Worcester Art Museum. This recent one was the one that prompted this story, but if anybody has any interest at some future time, I'd love to tell you about the recovery of this one, because it was interesting and different, very different, but also just a lot of fun. And now there are 2 paintings in the museum that is available. So when any of you come to Worcester, let me know, and we'll get you down to the museum. But it's been, 2 of the highlights of my career as a lawyer for so many reasons. And thank you for letting me share my story with you.
Thanks,
I'd
Warner.
love to hear any questions.
Yeah, I just
Or comments that you might
one
have.
thing that I know we talked about earlier was the theft, and how some of these paintings that have turned up seem to somehow come out of Robert Cornell's in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Well, yes, because the fact that he was suspected initially that the painting showed up in his house from his ex-wife. Oh, the other thing that was helpful is when he was interviewed extensively at the time of the recovery, he swore, as I said, I would never let a painting go like that if I had it. I know these things. Well, when we settled with the elderly couple on the Hassan painting, I said, I do, as part of the settlement, would you please send me a copy of the bill of sale in 2006? Or they sold it. I bought it in 1995 or so, and they sent it to me. The bill of sale was signed by a gentleman named Robert Cornell. So he's now deceased, and ended up, I think, not very well off. I don't know where the rest of the paintings went. Between Holyoke and Springfield and us, it's about 40 years. 40 miles. There's a town called Brimfield, which has a very well-known Brimfield Fair in the fall, in which in extensive grounds, and they sell everything. And we think that some of these paintings might have been sold there, probably by Mr. Cornell, but we don't know that for a fact. All we know is that we know who did sell them, who sold them, and we've gotten 2 of them back. And, hopefully in the future, 1 or more of the others will turn up.
Yeah, and basically they went into private collections probably, and they will not show up
I mean,
until
at one time I was thinking, well, what happened is someone knew this, orchestrated the theft, and someone wanted these paintings, and they're all now in some Sheikh of Arabi's man cave in someplace, and we'll never see any of them. Since 3 of them have showed up in very different places, I think the other ones are out there in private hands. And if any of you happen to own one of them, please give me a call.
Thank you, Werner. And we're open to questions. Anybody has some. One of the great things that Alan and I had the opportunity was to talk with Warner about this, and I think the one of the key things was the people involved, and you did a really nice job of describing the people involved and the lucky circumstances.
Yeah.
They had gone to buy new paintings with the money from the insurance company, and the person who was looking at the Pissarro was a client of the
Yeah.
gallery owner who they bought from. So he was the one who really put it out there that this is a stolen painting when it wasn't done at all. So that was really a very lucky break, but you guys had to jump on it right away.
Well, I mean, yeah, but that's what we were getting paid for. I suppose the other thing I should mention that is with both of the two stolen paintings, there's some additional good luck in that Mr. Stoddard's father and mother established a charitable foundation in Worcester, which is now a $80 million foundation that supports Worcester areas. And one of the grants they made to the local Worcester Art Museum was a significant grant back in '86 timeframe to establish an art requisition fund at the Worcester Art Museum so they could have a source of funds to buy new artworks. So when we got through with our family, number of us, including me, happened to be trustees of the Stoddard Charitable Trust. And when the painting was recovered in 1998, what we paid to Liberty Mutual in '95 plus all of the expenses, we were able to send a bill to the art museum to pay us from the art requisition fund for the painting that had just been turned over to them, which they did. And with the Abercrombie painting, the same thing. So there really was no cost to any private people to get these paintings back. But it's just another little interesting twist. So you all should come to Worcester for a lot of reasons, because, we're only 40 miles west of Boston. We are the second largest city in New England, grew by over 20,000 in the last decade. And with the seas rising, Boston is going to eventually disappear. And then Worcester will be a shorefront community. We're at 1,000 feet, so we probably won't get flooded out. But it's a great place to live, and it's so centrally located for all of New England and even New York City.
And having spent your life there, you know it well.
When
Alan, you had a question.
Yeah,
It's
please.
not really a question, it's just a comment. When we started talking with Warner, I started doing a deep dive on Google. And if you Google Stoddard painting theft, and you don't have to put anything any more than that, you get these great links to these newspaper articles describing the theft and going into great detail, and including a picture of the house and the fireplace that Warner's told us about. So I had a wonderful week and a half just kind of
Going through the stuff.
diving into the research. It was great.
Well, it was great last year to pick up the Vogue and to see the article that was about you and the art theft, Warner.
I mean, in Vanity Fair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Warner,
Okay.
George Cannon here, Warner. Just saying hi.
I was hoping you would be quiet, George.
You know I can't resist. Great story, Warner, and I want you to know I don't have any of the paintings, but it's good to see you, my friend.
It's great to see you.
Ed, you had a question.
Yeah, this is an observation on your good sharing of the recent interview about Alabama during civil rights times with Heather Cox Richardson. And it's really for Don Brown. I think we have, a link to that. And it's a very, very rich interview that she did during this anniversary with the former Attorney General of Alabama, Doug Jones.
Right.
And he was really terrific in terms of talking about how he resurrected, the need for justice for the people that set those bombs that destroyed those 4 young Black girls in the church. And I think you'd find it a rich thing and maybe want to share it. And I think I have your email, Huff, but I know I have Ken Wilcox's. So I'll ask, if I don't have it, I'll send it to Ken, asking him to send it to you at Don so that you can decide.
Put that out. Yeah, it was a great article. It really was. And Heather Cox Richardson, I think, does a great job in terms of
Amen.
presenting the history of things.
Right.
Any other questions for Warner in terms of what happened? Has anybody else experienced an art theft? And
Yeah, I have
yeah,
one.
Bob, I was wondering, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, years ago when I was running a gallery in New York, someone stole a very valuable Edward Hopper etching right under my nose.
Uh.
A good-looking couple, young couple, came in to the gallery, and the woman stood up close to me, and her back was to her partner, who was looking at the etching. And he must have slipped it into something while she was charming me, and off it went. We never recovered it. And that's about 40, 45 years ago. At the time, it was worth maybe $25,000.
Oh, that's interesting.
We haven't.
I have one
Yeah.
question, Warner. When Liberty Mutual insured these paintings with your uncle and aunt, did they not do an inventory, examine the paintings, take pictures of them, or do something so that the authentication later on would not be an issue?
That's a good question, Joel, and I don't know the answer. I don't think so. The only thing I was aware of was the list of from the fine arts policy listing the various paintings and whatever value my uncle had put in. And I don't know. I know he was a director of Liberty Mutual at that time, and they may have not have done all the formal things, but I think that's a interesting point, because if you're insuring something, you want to make sure that what was stolen was what you actually insured. So that's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer to it.
I think the insurance company depends on you to produce the information to prove it was authentic.
Right.
So they don't feel they have the obligation to do that.
Yeah. But I don't know that they paid on the insurance policy. So I don't know,
Yeah.
what negotiations they had. But we've gotten two paintings back, and those are the two most valuable. The Pissarro was insured for $95,000. The Abercomp was insured for $65,000, and the rest of the interesting one. And there's the fellow who was very much involved with the Abercomp is a very interesting person. If you want to look up a guy named Cliff Shorer, Shorer, the Vanity Fair article that Huff talked about was really about him and this particular painting.
Warner, I can send a link out to that as a follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah. Ted, you had a question or a
Well,
comment.
We've not experienced art theft, but we know in Dallas a name that Warner would certainly know, and that's Robert Edsel, who
Yeah.
wrote the book The Monuments Men that was in 2009 and then made into a movie starring George Clooney in 2014 about the recovery of the stolen art and valuables by the Nazis. And he devoted much of his life, and he's still alive, he's in his 80s, after having made a lot of money in business, to that effort to recover all that stuff.
Mhm.
That's really a fascinating read and a good,
This
And
gentleman, Cliff
yeah.
Shore, has recovered some paintings for people. And you mentioned the Monuments Men. In terms of the liberal arts at Williams, Professor Stoddard, no relation that I know of, Professor Faison, and Professor Pearson were the people in our art department that made such a difference. Professor Faison was one of the Monuments Men.
Correct.
And
He was mentioned in the book.
right,
Also.
yeah. And
Yeah.
his particular niche was trying to recover paintings that were destined for Hitler's museum in Linz. And he came down to Worcester and talked about it, and it was just really interesting. And one other closing remark, of course, I read the book and loved it, and then saw the movie, which I frankly was disappointed in. But there was one incident that he talked about that didn't appear in the movie, and I'm going to ask you, why they didn't. Um, there was one of the monuments men was a guy named George Stout, who after the war came back and ended up being a director of the Art Museum in Worcester. But as the Nazis were collapsing and they were closing in and coming in Germany, the United States put together a staff of people called the Monuments Men to advise the troops when they were coming into this town or that town as to what kind of historical or cultural amenities there might be there that they could avoid trying to just destroy. And part of that process, as the Germans secreted a lot of art, Goering had his own collection, Himmler had his own collection, and they were, I think they would have been able to hang out a lot, persist a lot longer if they hadn't spent so much time trying to move this and that collection of art back from the front lines. But Stout and others, people were coming forward and saying, well, I think there's some art stored here. And he got a lead that there was some chalet or chateau where there was some stolen art secreted. And it was right along the boundary of the Allied lines and the German lines. So they got a Jeep. He had a driver who had a .45 pistol and they went zooming off and talked with the inn owner or the shop owner at this location to hear about this possible repository and told them where it was. And they set off like lickety split to find it and unknowingly got out ahead of the American Ally lines and going up this hill and come over the crest of the hill and come down, and the road stretches away. And there, coming towards them, is a battalion of German tanks and troops and vehicles, and they had a .45 pistol. And they finally decided the goose was cooked, so they just kept going, and they came to the tank, and the sea sort of parted, and they were able to drive down, and they got to the battalion's captain or general or whatever his name card, and there was someone there that spoke English, and their question was, where are the Allied line? Because they wanted to surrender, and they didn't want to surrender to the Russians who were coming behind them. They wanted to surrender to the Americans. And they said, oh, it's about 4 miles down that way. They said, thank you. And they went on, and Stout and went on in the other direction to check this out. And I always thought you couldn't believe something like, if you put it in a movie, you'd say they made this up. But they didn't put it in the movie, and I can't understand why they didn't. So I thought the book was much better than the movie.
Warner, thank you very much. What I wanted to do before we finish up, and thank you all for participating, is we're going to be having our 60th reunion in 2027. As I say, and started out tonight with Don offering to have an event for us starting this whole process. And Don, that's just great. That's going to be June 4th to June 7th this next year, and we hope we have a lot of people attending that. But we have two other Zoom sessions lined up, one for October 23rd, and that's going to be Dave Reichert. And Dave, I know you're here.
He's asleep now.
No, because he's farther, he's in the West Coast, so he can't be doing that. But he'll share a handful of decision-making principles that he learned when he was working at Nike for 18 years. And he's going to share those and then see which of those principles are still useful today. And we'll have some personal discussion on that in breakout groups and see how we feel about some of those things. So that's going to be a really interesting get together. And then on November 20th, and put that in your book too, Peter, you're here and I see you. But Peter Krause is going to be talking about really a lifetime of studying the tick and all the different diseases that have come from that and all the work that he's done. And I think it's going to be another very interesting get together. So if there are no other questions, people can stay on for a little bit if they wish. But Warner,
I'm pointing at George Cannon. Do you
Yeah.
still live in Springfield area?
I do, and I'm glad you had so many good mentions of Western Mass. Holyoke. Right now. I'm sitting at a library in Chicopee, about 1 mile from Holyoke, and I do remember the name of that art gallery you mentioned.
Well, you know what I was going to say. You ought to come to Worcester. You've probably never been to Worcester.
I'm planning. Oh yeah, I've been there many times. I almost went to Holy Cross.
You couldn't get in, right?
Well, yeah, of course, that was the problem there. But I am going to go to your museum, Warner. That sounds wonderful. I haven't been to the
Let
art
me know
museum.
when you show
I've
up.
been to the. Okay, I will do that. I've been to the military museum a couple of years ago. That was enjoyable. But I will call you and we'll go to the art museum together.
Great. All right. Well,
that
thank you all.
goes
This
for
was
all
all
of us,
fun.
See you
right?
later.
Thank you very much, guys. And thank you, Warner. That was really just a great presentation.